We're back with another r/nosleep video. Thank you for all your support and feedback. I hope you enjoy. Story 1. If you're armed and at the Glentmont Metro, please shoot me. Written by Sarcassonomicon. Make it a headshot. Shoot me in the temple, aiming slightly downwards. I need the bullet to travel to the shortest possible distance through my brain before it hits my hippocampus. If I'm lucky, the sensation of the gunshot ripping through my skull will only last a few decades. As awful as this sounds, you'll be doing me an enormous favor. Death by headshot, as soon as possible, is vastly better than the alternative. My ordeal started over 10,000 years ago, at 10:15 this morning. I earn extra money by participating in drug trials. I'm a so-called healthy subject who takes experimental drugs to help assess side effects. Once it was a kidney drug. A few times it's been something for blood pressure or cholesterol. This morning, they told me that the drug I took was a psychoactive substance intended to accelerate brain function. None of the drugs I had tested so far had ever done anything to me, in the recreational sense. In other words, none of the drugs I've tested had given me a killer buzz or mellowed me out or anything. Maybe I've always ended up in the placebo group, but nothing I've tested has affected me at all. Today's drug was different. This shit worked. They gave me a pill at 10:15 and told me to hang out in the waiting room until they called me back for some tests. Only about 13 minutes, the research assistant told me. I flopped onto the waiting room couch and read a few articles from a copy of Psychology Today that was sitting on the coffee table. They hadn't called me back when I finished the Psychology Today, so I picked up a US News and read it cover to cover. Then I read an old Scientific American. What was taking them so damn long? I sluggishly turned my head to look at the wall clock. It was only 10:23 a.m. I had read all 3 magazines in 8 minutes. I remember thinking that this was going to be a long day. I was right. The waiting room had a little bookshelf with some used hardcovers on it. When I stood up to walk to the bookshelf, it felt like my legs barely worked. It's not that they were weak, they were just slow. It took a full minute just to stand up off the couch and another minute to take 2 steps to the bookcase. I scanned the old books on the shelf and picked out a copy of Moby Dick. My arms had the same problems as my legs, just reaching 1 foot in front of me to grab the book took a long time. I actually got bored just waiting for my hand to reach the spine of the book. I slogged back to the couch and collapsed onto it in a slow motion fall that reminded me of low-gravity hops of an astronaut on the moon. I opened Moby Dick slowly and began to read. It started with, "Call me Ishmael," and got as far as Ahab throwing his pipe into the sea, which was all the way to friggin' chapter 30 before they called me back. "How are you feeling?" the research assistant asked me. "I feel slow," I said. "Actually, it's the other way around. Everything seems slow because you were so fast." "But my legs, my arms, they're moving in slow motion." "Your body seems like it's moving slowly because your brain is fast. Your brain is running up to 10 to 20 times faster than normal. You are thinking and perceiving reality at an accelerated pace. But your body is still constrained by the laws of biomechanics. Frankly, you're not moving much faster than a normal person." She pantomimed a jogging motion. "But your brain is running so much faster right now that even your fast walk seems very slow to you." I thought about my slow motion flop onto the waiting room couch. Even if my muscles had slowed down, my body would still react to gravity the same way. But in the waiting room, I fell in slow motion. Slow muscles couldn't explain why gravity seemed weaker. My brain was going at warp 10. That's how I managed to read 3 magazines in the first 30 chapters of Moby Dick in 15 minutes. They ran a series of tests on me. The physical tests were fun. They made me juggle 3 balls, then 4, then 6. I had no problem keeping 6 balls in the air because they seemed to be moving so slowly. It was boring, frankly, waiting for each ball to move through its arc so I could catch it with my slow motion hands and toss it back into the air. They threw Cheerios in the air and I caught them with chopsticks. They dropped a handful of coins and counted the total value before they hit the ground. The cognitive tests were less fun, but very illuminating. Finish a 50-word search, 3 seconds. Solve an intricate maze drawn into a poster-sized paper, 2 seconds. View a slideshow projected at 10 images per second and answer detailed questions about what I saw, 95% correct. They told me I measured over 250 on the Knopf scale. Apparently, that's deep into the superhuman range of thinking speeds. Then, they sent me home. It'll wear off in a few hours, they said, which will seem like days to you. Try to use the residual effects to get some work done. Catch up on work emails while you're still in high-speed mode. The ride home was horrible. It was only 3 metro stops, and in real-world time, it only took about 35 minutes, but in my drug-accelerated hypertime, it felt like days. Days. Just walking out of the medical research suite to the elevator seemed like it took an hour. I sprinted out of the office, willing my legs to push me faster, but the laws of biomechanics held me prisoner. As accelerated as my brain was, I couldn't do anything to make my legs work faster. The huge disconnect between my body and mind made it extremely difficult to judge how and when to slow down, turn, or rotate my body. I had basically turned into a giant slow-motion spaz. I misjudged my speed and rammed into the wall by the elevator button at a pretty good speed. Even though I could see the wall coming at me, I couldn't make my finger, outstretched to hit the elevator button, move away fast enough, and I jammed it against the wall. Hard. The pain was intense. If my brain had been running at regular speed, it only probably would have hurt for like 30 seconds or so. But in my accelerated state, the intense pain seemed to last for half an hour, 45 minutes maybe. The elevator ride was horrible. It felt like I spent 4 or 5 hours just ascending 7 floors with nothing to look at but the interior of the elevator car. I sprinted to the metro station. I have to admit, this part was almost fun. Even though my body moved at what seemed to me super slow speed, I could still carefully choose how and where to place my feet, swing my arms, and turn my torso. It only took a block or two to get used to having my brain that ran 24 times faster than my body. Then I basically sprint danced the rest of the way, twisting and juking between people on the sidewalk and dodging moving cars with inches, aka minutes of clearance. I spent an hour in my time frame descending into the subway and running to the platform. Endless tedium waiting the 6 minutes for the Red Line train to arrive. Although there was more to look at on the metro platform than inside the elevator, it was still intensely boring. I should have stolen that copy of Moby Dick. The Red Line train roared into the station in slow motion. The normally high-pitched squeal of its brakes was frequency shifted by my high-speed mind into a long, low tone, like a monotone tuba solo. It wasn't just the squealing subway train that was 3 octaves lower than normal. All sound was slowed down to the point of near inaudibility. Voices were gone, shifted below the threshold frequency of my hearing. I did manage to hear a screaming baby on the subway car. Her shriek slowed down to sound like whale songs. Sharp sounds like car horns and trucks bouncing over potholes were low, muddy roars like distant thunder. Back at the research offices, I could still hear and communicate with the research staff, but now verbal communication with anyone would be impossible. The effects of the drug were still intensifying. I spent what seemed like days on that fucking Red Line train. Days! Listening to the whale songs of the screaming baby and the tuba solo of the brakes, where ordinary voices were frequency shifted out of my audio range, smells didn't seem to be affected. I never became noseblind to the body odor, the stench of the train's brakes, the melange of farts and other smells wafting through the metro car. I finally got back to my apartment, sprinting through my open door and into the front hall at full speed like a slow, relaxing drift down a lazy river. I was relieved to be home. At least I had stuff I could do there. I picked up the book I was reading, 100 Years of Solitude, and finished it. Despite turning the pages so quickly that I tore many of them, it seemed like most of the time I spent finishing the book was spent on page turning and not actually reading. 3 minutes had passed since I got home. I tried surfing the internet. My God, it takes a long time for computers to boot these days, but it was too frustratingly slow. Hours, seemingly, to load each new page, and a fraction of a second to read it. 100 articles in my newsfeed read, and just 3 more minutes done. I dipped into my pile of yet-to-be-read books and finished 2 more. 4 more minutes had passed. I decided to try to sleep off the remaining effects of the drug. Unfortunately, whatever part of my mind is responsible for perception, the part that's been accelerated to hyperspeeds by the drug, isn't the same part that governs speed. Despite being awake for what I perceived as days, my physical brain still thought it was 1:25 p.m. It was not ready for sleep. Nevertheless, I tried to sleep. I walked to my bedroom, a slow 45-minute drift through my apartment, and flung myself into bed, lazily falling like a feather onto the mattress. I closed my eyes and lay there for hours and hours, 10 minutes of reality time before giving up. Sleep would not come. I was facing what was going to feel like days or maybe even weeks of being trapped in a slow-motion prison. So, I took an Ambien. The sensation of the pill and the splash of water I used to swallow it sliding down my throat was sickening. A lump that blocked my breathing, moving like a slug down my esophagus. I read a book. 10 minutes had passed. I read another 18 minutes since I took the Ambien. I threw the book across the room in disgust at my situation. The book slowly pirouetted and spun through the air like a leaf blowing in a breeze. It hit the wall with a long, faint rumble, the only sound I had heard for what seemed like hours, then drifted to the floor like a flip-flop sinking in a swimming pool. The force of gravity hadn't changed since I took the pill. The laws of physics were the same. It was just my perception of time that had gone wackadoo. This meant I could use the speed thing seemed to fall as a way of judging the effects of the drug. Based on how long it took the book to drift to the floor, I estimated the effects of the drug were still intensifying. I read a magazine. Turned on the television. I clearly saw each frame of the video like I was watching a slideshow. Frustrated, I turned the television off. I read some more. The first 2 books of Churchill's A History of the English-Speaking Peoples, not exactly a light read. Frankly, I hated it, but given the hours of tedium it would take to go get another book off my shelf, just sitting on the couch and reading Churchill was better. Or at least less worse. It had now been 35 minutes since I took the Ambien. I lay down on the couch and closed my eyes. Time passed. I inhaled, an hours-long process. Time passed. I exhaled for more hours. Sleep would not come. I needed a new plan. I decided to go back to the offices where they gave me the drug. Maybe they would have something that could counteract its effects, or at least something to knock me out until it wore off. I exited my apartment as fast as possible, taking hours in my time for him to do so. I didn't even bother locking the door. It would have taken too long. Down the stairs, it's faster than the elevator if you run. Through the lobby, out the front door, and onto the street, these few things felt like a long day at the office. Sprinting down the street, dancing and weaving between pedestrians with what must have looked like to them superhuman dexterity. Down the first flight of stairs at the metro. Across the landing, another hour. Then on the 2 second flights of stairs, that's when the Ambien hit me. The Ambien did not make me sleepy. Not at all. Instead, it must have had a severe cross-reaction with the experimental drug I took this morning. I was bounding down the second flight of stairs, moving in slow motion, but still making perceptible progress, then wham! Everything stopped. The dull roar of the street and metro noise ceased, replaced by the most perfect silence I had ever experienced. My downwards motion seemed to completely freeze. Before the Ambien kicked in, my perception of time was maybe a few hundred times slower than real time. After the Ambien took effect, time moved thousands of times slower. Every second seemed like days to me. Even just moving my eyes to focus on a new point was like an impossibly slow scroll across my visual field. Over the course of the afternoon, I learned how to walk, run, and jump when my mind ran hundreds of times faster than my body. But with another 4 or 5 orders of magnitude of slowdown caused by the Ambien, body control was almost impossible. I fell on the stairs. Even though I was all but frozen in mid-step, controlling my muscles was impossible. I commanded my foot forwards for hours, then backwards for hours more when it seemed like I would miss the next step. Hours attempting to adjust the angle of my ankle, then readjusting when it felt wrong. Despite these efforts, I rolled my ankle on the next step. The pain wasn't at all mitigated by the slowness. Hours of increasing strain on my bent ankle. The nerve signals that send pain into the brain must work differently than the nerves in my ear. Sonic energy was spread out over time, diluted until it was imperceptible. Pain flowed into my brain undiluted by the change in my perception of time. Hours and hours of increasing weight on my turned ankle turned into hours of increasing pain upon increasing pain. I pitched forwards, my high-speed mind completely unable to control my low-speed body. I drifted downwards for days, managing to rotate my torso enough to keep my head from impacting the ground first. I eventually landed on my right shoulder. At first, the impact wasn't even noticeable. Then I felt a slight pressure in my shoulder as it came in contact with the ground. The pressure grew, bringing increasing pain for hours upon hours. My shoulder finally gave out, popping out of its socket with an endless, sickening tug. I came to a stop days later, crumpled onto the ground, staring at the ceiling, the pain in my shoulder still screaming at the intensity of a fresh violent injury. I had plenty of time to think during that fall. If every second seemed like days to me, then each minute of real-world time would be like years. Even if the drug cleared out of my system in the next 2 or 3 hours, this nightmare would seem to last centuries. By the time I hit the ground, I had a plan. I would somehow get to the platform and throw myself in front of the train. I twisted onto my hands and knees, days of my dislocated shoulder crying for relief. I misjudged my rotation and rolled onto my back. I tried again, collapsing onto my face as I tried to figure out how to control a body that moved slower than grass grew. Weeks of effort were finally rewarded with success. I stabilized on my hands and knees. If just getting on all fours was this difficult, I figured that walking or running was completely out of the question, so I crawled. I crawled through the metro tunnel. The dumb looks on the faces in the crowd lingered on me for weeks. I crawled onto the turnstile and onto the escalator. The escalator spilled the rush hour crowd onto the platform at the same speed a glacier spills ice into the sea. I looked down over the crowded platform during my interminable downward ride. The train status sign said the next train wouldn't arrive for 20 minutes. 20 minutes was like a year to me. I'd have to spend a year on the metro platform waiting to die. I crawled off the escalator, enduring days of stupid expressions on the commuters' faces. I sprawled a few feet onto a concrete bench and curled up next to it, trying to find a position to lessen the pain in my shoulder. Then my problem with time got worse. And possibly worse. The massive slowdown on the stairs was just the beginning of the interaction between the experimental drug and the Ambien. It fully hit me when I was curled up by the bench. I blinked. Years of darkness followed. Sound was already gone, and with my blink, sight was gone as well. All that existed was the pain from my fall. My hyper-accelerated mind wasted no time compensating for the lack of sensory input. Voices spoke to me. They sung to me in languages that never existed. Patterns and faces and colors came and went in my mind's eye. I recalled my whole life and imagined living another. I forgot English. I settled into a profound despair. I spoke to God. I became God. I imagined a new universe and brought it to life with my thoughts. Then I did it all again. And again. My eyes opened with geologic slowness. A faint glow. Weeks. A slit of light. Weeks. A narrow view of the metro platform. Ankles of the commuters near me and the advertisement on the opposite wall. I extracted my phone from my pocket, a project that spanned decades. How can I even explain the boredom? The pain in my shoulder is nothing compared to the boredom. Every thought I can think, I have thought hundreds of times already. The view of the ankles in advertisements never changes. Never. The boredom is so intense it's tangible, like a solid object of metal and stone wedged into my skull, inescapable. What are my options? If I crawl and fall into the tracks without an oncoming train to crush me, I won't die. I'll experience even more pain from the 4-foot fall, but I'll most likely be rescued by some do-gooder on the platform and unable to act when the train finally does arrive. My suffering in that scenario will be endless. So, I wait for the train, so I can throw myself under it. When it finally hits me, I will experience the pain of being ripped to pieces for centuries until finally the light of life leaves my brain and my experience ends. I've lived hundreds of lifespans at the foot of this bench. I am far older in spirit than any human who has ever lived. Most of my life experience has been a snapshot of pain huddled on the floor of a subway platform with an unchanging view of ankles and advertisements. This post is my plan B, my Hail Mary, my long shot. I've spent lifetimes typing and posting this message in the hopes that someone will read it and become convinced that my suffering must end. Someone on this platform right now, someone who will find the man curled under the bench, the man who crawled down the escalator, and kill him as swiftly as possible. A bullet to the temple. If you are armed and at the Glentmont Metro, please shoot me. Story 2, Space Girl, written by Head of Spectre. We called her Space Girl. Her real name was Megan Daniels, but nobody actually called her that. She had been Space Girl since grade 2. She was the kind of kid who stuck out in the crowd with her long red hair, ghostly pale skin, and Coke bottle glasses. For as long as I had known her, Space Girl had been quiet. She didn't like to be around us, she didn't play with us when we were kids, she didn't even talk much. Most of the time, she'd find somewhere to sit, far away from everyone else. Then she'd open up her little notebook and scribble inside of it. Sometimes she'd write poems, other times she drew. But she was always off in her own little world. And nowadays, I understand why we targeted her. She was different, and she was alone. That doesn't justify any of it, but kids can be cruel. I remember that it was Sasha Brown who told me that Space Girl was retarded because her mother was on drugs. She probably just made that up, but we all believed it. She had always been the worst towards Space Girl, and she kept that up until the end. It all started in grade 5 when Sasha took her notebook. It had been raining that day, so we had an indoor recess. Space Girl sat in the corner at her desk, eyes focused on her notebook as she methodically worked on a drawing. Sasha and I had been sitting nearby at our desks, and we simply watched her doing her thing. "I can't believe they let that retard sit with us," Sasha murmured. "Look at her. Well, why do they even let them in schools? They aren't going to learn anything." "Better than leaving her at home with her crackhead mom," said Tanya Everett. She and I weren't exactly friends, but she sat close to Sasha and I. "My dad says he's seen a different car in front of her house every day. He says that she lets boys come by and they pay her so they can have SCX. None of us could actually say the dreaded S word at the time. Sex was still a terribly unknown thing. And we all had been raised to believe that nobody decent would ever do it. Space Girl paused, and her eyes darted away from her book to look at us. I can only imagine she had heard us. Sasha just stared right back at her. "What? Do you have a problem, Space Girl?" she asked. The teacher was out of earshot, and that gave her carte blanche to say whatever she wanted. The Space Girl didn't respond. She just looked back down at her notebook, but Sasha had been challenged, or at least she thought she'd been. She looked over to the teacher's desk to make sure she was busy, then she got up and moved closer to Space Girl. "What are you even doing in there, retard?" As she reached out to snatch the book before Space Girl could stop her. "Oh, what even is this? A unicorn? What are you, 5? She handed the book to me and I took it on instinct. There was a brightly colored drawing of a unicorn inside. The artwork was actually pretty nice, but I would have never said so. The book was then passed on to Tanya next. The Space Girl could only look at us helplessly. "Wow, you can't even draw. Look at this." She tore the page out of the notebook and Space Girl let out a startled whimper, as if she had been struck. The picture was crumpled up and the book was thrown on the floor by Space Girl's desk. "Draw something that isn't trash next time," Tanya said, and Sasha just giggled as if anything other than being mean-spirited just for the sake of it. Space Girl slowly picked up her book off the floor, avoiding eye contact as Tanya and Sasha turned away from her. I continued to stare. I remember that the way she moved was so defeated, as if she were shrinking in on herself. She looked up at me, but only for a moment, and I felt bad for her. I really did. But I didn't do anything about it. I just left her to rejoin the others. After that, Space Girl became an easy target for Sasha and Tanya. Every chance they got, they'd harass her, and I regret to admit that I was usually right there with them. During the days where we could go outside for recess, Space Girl would always sit beneath the same tree, always working in her notebook. When she did, we would always lean over the trunk and look down over Space Girl's shoulder. "Wow, that's really good, Space Girl," was how most of her comments would start. "Did you mean to draw it like it got hit by a truck, or is that just your style?" There was never a compliment. She would always find something to needle. "Can you draw me?" Sasha once asked. "I heard that retards were always like art geniuses or something. Maybe it'll even look like a person." Space Girl didn't look up at her. She seemed not to be trying to acknowledge the insults. I won't pretend like I was blameless either. I never stopped them. And there were plenty of times where I was right there, making fun of her because that's what we did. And we weren't the only ones. More or less, everyone hurt her in some way or another. But she never complained. I think she was too scared to. It was late December in 7th grade where things got even worse. I don't know all the details, and I don't know for just how long things had been boiling over, but I heard a rumor that James Hardy had it out for Space Girl. James had only been in my class a few times, and he wasn't in my class that year. He was a small, mousy-looking kid who was convinced he was the world's toughest gangster. The rumor said that someone had seen his dad going into Space Girl's house. Naturally, there had been speculation that they'd been having sex. Someone told me that James's parents had been divorcing because of it. Somehow, all of these rumors had mutated into claims that James and Space Girl were dating, and I think that was what had rubbed him the wrong way. We were coming in from recess when some boys decided to pull a little prank on James. The whole prank had been set up by Brian Jordan and his brother Mike. They had some mistletoe for the holiday season and had set it up in the hall leading back to our classroom. Mike had grabbed Space Girl during recess and were holding her behind the door where the mistletoe was. When James walked through, they pushed her at him and snapped a picture. I'd been just behind James when it happened. I watched as Space Girl came flying out of seemingly nowhere, eyes wide and afraid, and then slammed into James. They both hit the ground, and I could hear the other boys laughing. "Look, she wanted to give you a kiss," one of the boys said. Space Girl was trying to crawl away from James and pick up her notebook, but somebody had kicked it out of sight. I remember that she had looked back towards James, and there were tears in her eyes. She must have been terrified with everything that was going on. She clearly hadn't wanted any part of this, but there she was at the center of it. "You fucking faggot assholes," James yelled as he picked himself up. "Hey, she just wanted to give you a smooch," laughed Ryan. "Come on, give her a kiss." Someone pushed Space Girl towards James, and he glared at her as if it was all her fault. She tried to stand and run, but he was angry and he wasn't thinking straight. I watched as he grabbed her and hit her. A square punch to the jaw. Then he tossed it to the ground and went after Brian next. A teacher had to get in to pull James off of him. He, Space Girl, and the Jordan brothers ended up getting suspended right before the Christmas holidays. We didn't see Space Girl again until January, and we didn't see James or his friends ever again. On Christmas Eve, there was a car accident on the highway outside of my town. Supposedly, it had swerved off the road to avoid an animal of some kind and gone into a ditch. Mike, Brian, and their parents didn't survive. On December 27th, James was killed while outside shoveling his driveway. My parents told me that he had been attacked by an animal, probably a deer or something, but that seemed so unusual. I'd never heard anything about a deer attacking people before, especially not in my area. I went over to Sasha's house on the day before New Year's. We'd both gotten some gift cards for Christmas and we were planning to walk to the mall together to use them. Her parents weren't home, they both had to work, so it was just us when I got there. "Hey, kept me waiting," she said when I knocked on the door. "Sorry." "It's fine. I'll be ready in a bit. Come on upstairs. I want to show you something." I didn't question what it was. I figured it was just something else she had gotten for Christmas, so I went upstairs with her. "You're going to love it," she promised. "It's going to be so funny." She led me to her bedroom, and as soon as she opened the door, I spotted a familiar notebook on her desk. "Where did you get this?" I asked, walking closer to it. "Space Girl dropped it when Brian and his brother pulled that prank the other day. She dropped it. I may have grabbed it, just for safekeeping." She cracked a wry grin before opening the notebook. "Look at this. She's been drawing the same damn unicorns forever. She didn't even finish this one." She paused at one small picture that was labeled the Unicorn Prince. It depicted an empty field with a blank space where the titular prince should have been. Sasha flipped through the pages a little more until she got to the newer ones. "I figured since they kicked Space Girl out for a little while, and her mom is too poor to get her anything for the holidays, I'd step up. What do you think?" Sasha wasn't anywhere near as good an artist as Space Girl was, but the simple detail in which she had drawn turned my stomach. In her first picture, Space Girl was hanging from a rope. Her tongue was hanging out and her eyes were closed. And the second one, Space Girl had a gun in her mouth. And the third one, she was standing on the edge of a building. Sasha giggles as I flipped through her crude depictions of suicide. There were pages of them. "What do you think?" she asked with a grin. "I bet she'll lose her shit." I closed the notebook and looked over at Sasha. Are you out of your mind?" I asked. Sasha's grin faded. "What do you mean?" "You stole her notebook just so that you could draw these? Sasha, that's really messed up." "It's Space Girl. Who the hell cares about Space Girl, Jane? You just drew her killing herself over and over again." I took the book off her desk. "Do you not understand what's wrong with that?" Sasha just stared at me like I was crazy. "Fine, sue me for trying to be funny," Sasha said. "Just give it here." She outstretched a hand to take the notebook, but I pulled it back from her. "No, you're just going to put something else in there." Anger flared in Sasha's eyes. "Jane, just give me the book." "No." I opened the book and I started to tear out those pages of Space Girl's suicide. Sasha lunged for me, trying to grab the book and stop me, but I pushed her back. I didn't mean to push so hard, but I did, and she fell, landing hard on the ground. For a moment, Sasha looked up at me, wide-eyed and shocked. I don't think anyone had laid a hand on her like that before. And then I saw something in her eyes. Not just anger. Something worse. It was the same thing that had prompted her to draw those horrible pictures of Space Girl. I turned and I ran, bolting down her stairs and out of her front door, back into the snow. I clutched Space Girl's notebook to my chest the entire time and I didn't let go until I got home. I spent the rest of the Christmas break terrified that my parents would get a call from Sasha's. I pushed her, and that seemed like such a big deal at the time. In hindsight, I doubt Sasha would have told her parents what had happened. They would have asked why I pushed her, and I would have told them about the notebook. On some level, she must have known that what she had done was wrong. She was a cruel person, but there was a limit. Part of me hoped that she had realized that I was right and we could patch things up when school started again, but honestly, I wasn't so sure. I remember looking through Space Girl's drawings, the ones that she had done. I remember the ones I'd made fun of the most. There was one with a mermaid on a rock combing her hair. Her eyes were closed in relaxed bliss. I remember saying how stupid her facial expression had looked, but honestly, I kind of liked it. I flipped through the pages some more, through unicorns, fairies, and castles, but I paused at the page depicting the unicorn prince. Back at Sasha's place, it had been blank, but at my house, it was finished. The unicorn prince stood proudly in his build, looking skywards with his horn proudly displayed. Maybe I'd been thinking of a different picture. I brushed it off and flipped back to where Sasha's pictures were. One by one, I started tearing them out of the notebook and tossing them in the trash. It was a waste of paper, but I refused to give them back to Space Girl with those images still in it. On the first day back to school, I was up early. I made sure the notebook was packed into my bag and was out as early as I could be. The snow on the ground was almost pristine as I walked to school, but I remember seeing some tracks on my lawn headed down the side of my house. Deep U-shaped indents that looked like they had been almost made by hooves. A deer, perhaps. I didn't dwell on them and made my way down to the freshly shoveled sidewalk and back to school. I wasn't entirely sure if Space Girl would be back yet, but she was. She was alone in the classroom, sitting at her desk and drawing in a brand new notebook. She paused briefly when I walked in to join her, and I could see her side-eyeing me. She didn't say a word as I drew nearer, but I thought I saw her shoulders tense up ever so slightly. "Hey," I said. I hope you had a nice holiday." She didn't respond. "I'm sorry about what happened the other day. I didn't know anything about it, but it just seemed really mean-spirited." Still no answer. I reached into my backpack, taking out her old notebook. I put it on her desk in front of her. She stared at it, still silent, then back at me. "Sasha took it. I was over at her house the other day and she showed it to me. I had to take some pages out, but she drew some really awful things in there. I didn't think it would be right to give it back with those things in there." I paused, feeling smaller as Space Girl stared at me. She didn't seem angry or thankful. She didn't seem anything at all, just stoic. "I'm sorry if I wasn't all that great to you before," I said, and then I shuffled off to my desk. Space Girl waited until I sat down before she opened her notebook and inspected it. Then she closed her new book and started something new on a fresh page in her old one. It wasn't much, but it made me feel at least a little good for what I had done. When Sasha got in, she didn't talk to me. She didn't even look at me. Neither did Tanya or any other of our mutual friends. I knew from the moment they walked in that I had burned my bridges with them, but I still wanted to try. The teacher hadn't come in yet, so I figured it might be worth it to try and talk to Sasha. I got up to move closer to her, and she gave me a look of utter disgust. "What do you want?" she spat. Now it was my turn to be silent. "Fuck off and leave us alone," Tanya said. "You'd obviously rather hang out with the fucking retard than us, and I really don't want you spreading your germs to us. It's a quarantine issue." I stared at both of them, and I could have sworn I knew how Space Girl felt. But what was I supposed to say to any of that? Instead, I returned to my desk without a word. Space Girl stared at me the entire time. Her pencil rested over her notebook, but she didn't write anything. She set it down, drew out the page she had been writing on, and jammed it into her pocket. I later saw her toss it into the trash during lunch. I didn't really have anyone left, so I thought that maybe it might be a good idea to pull it out. Maybe it was something she wasn't happy with. I had never seen her throw out a drawing before. I was thinking that maybe I could use it as a peace offering of sorts, or something along those lines. When I saw what she had written on it, I almost threw it back into the trash. "Your words. There's a land where your sorrows may go. A sickening land where it always snows. The snow is putrid in color and smell. Its substance, filth and things I won't tell. Only your father has been there before. One day your boyfriend will visit once more. Displacing your carcass, this humanoid hell. Your sorry can go there to this hole in your shell. My unsubtle message, this subtextual jazz, is take your apology and stuff it up your ass. This was unlike anything I'd ever seen her write. It was so crass and spiteful. This was as close to hatred as she could have gotten. I understood why she'd thrown it out. It didn't fit with anything else she had done. Those things had been beautiful, despite what people had said to her. This was angry and ugly. This was something she had written for me. I put it in my pocket. I wasn't going to give it back to her, but I wanted to keep it. I wanted to remember the way that I had made her feel. 8th grade wasn't fun for me. I had very few friends left. Sasha never forgave me for turning on her. Her version of the story was slowly warped as time went on. First, I'd punched her and stolen the book. Then I tried to kiss her, punched her when she would refuse, then stole the book to try to get her in trouble. Rumors of me being a dyke spread pretty quickly, and hot on the hills came the rumors that I was dating Space Girl. I tried not to let them bother me too much. I knew the truth, and at the end of the day, I'd done the right thing. By the time high school rolled around, I was hoping for a fresh start, and I figured I could make friends with them before Sasha's rumors spread. I had a bit of success in that department. I fell in with a better crowd at least. Sasha stuck with her old same clique. It grew ever so slightly, but she was determined to live out the movie Mean Girls, and most people didn't pay her any mind. Space Girl barely changed at all. I didn't see much of her when high school started. She was in a few of my classes, but I rarely saw her outside of them. Whenever she had a moment, she'd be in the library, usually in one of the corner cubicles working on her drawings. Sometimes I thought about talking to her and trying to strike up a friendship, but it never felt right. Sasha's bullying never let up, of course. Of course she stalked Space Girl to the library, where she'd pull the same old shit she'd been pulling since the 5th grade. She'd leer over her cubicle and comment on her drawings, picking them apart just like she always had. I stopped her whenever I saw it, but I didn't always see it. "Coming to rescue her again, Jane?" Sasha asked once when I had interrupted her. Tanya leered at me from behind her, chewing gum with her mouth open. "What's she ever done to you anyways?" I asked. "She's just minding her own business." Oh? Oh, what's she done to you, Dick?" Sasha hissed. She leaned down over her cubicle and looked down at the notebook. "Unicorns? Unicorns, unicorns, fucking unicorns. When are you going to grow up, Space Girl?" "Hey, I told you to stop." I rounded the cubicle and saw Sasha recoil. For a moment, I saw a bit of fear in her eyes. It vanished quickly and was replaced by a familiar rage. "Fine," she said. "Tan, let's leave the happy couple to their alone time." She pulled away from the cubicle and disappeared, with Tanya nipping at her heels like a faithful terrier. Space Girl remained hunched over her notebook, her long red hair spilling over her shoulders. She seemed impossibly still. I turned to leave her when I heard, "Thanks." I looked back at her and saw that she was looking at me. You're welcome," I said. "Let me know if she bothers you again, all right?" "I will, but you're usually there anyways." Her voice was soft and low. I'd heard it before, but I don't ever remember her speaking directly to me. "Yeah, well, it's just not right. She's such a child. One of these days she's gonna have to grow up." Space Girl just nodded, looking over towards the library door, then back down at her notebook again. For a moment, I thought about asking her about what she was drawing. I thought about saying something else, but no. I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. I left her alone again. In 10th grade, I took art as an elective. I wasn't much of an artist, but I figured it would be an easy course. To the surprise of no one, Space Girl was there. I actually asked her to work with me on a few group projects. I think the prospect of being asked to work together was foreign to her. She looked at me suspiciously when I did, but when she smiled, it was the biggest smile that I'd ever seen. I went to her house for the first time to work on a portrait project with her once. We were supposed to take turns drawing portraits of each other, and I volunteered to let her draw me first. Rumors of her mother had always surrounded Space Girl, so I wasn't entirely sure what to expect when I got there. I certainly wasn't expecting the quiet, neatly kept house that I found. The woman who answered the door looked like an older version of her daughter, sans the Coke bottle glasses. You must be Jane, she said. She wasn't smiling, but she didn't sound upset either. Yes, ma'am. Come on in. Megan's upstairs. She was just getting ready for you. The house was warm with plenty of knickknacks on the walls, plates and porcelain dolls mostly. Her mom sent me upstairs and I didn't waste any time. On the landing leading up to Space Girl's room, I could see a mural of family photos and paused to look at them. I could recognize Space Girl and her mother in most of them. Space Girl never seemed to be smiling. I only saw her father in a few of the early pictures. Space Girl looked like she was only a young child in a few of the pictures I saw him in, though. I didn't dwell on it for long and headed towards what I assumed was her room. The cardboard stars and planets on it gave it away. Sure enough, she was inside waiting for me. She sat facing the door behind an easel in the center of her room. Her bed was neatly made and tucked away in the corner. She had a clean little desk that she'd clearly been working on and had set a chair out for me to sit on. I hadn't expected something so overwhelmingly formal, and I almost started laughing. But then I noticed her walls. They weren't just covered in drawings. The art pieces on them were full-on paintings. They were the same fantasy depictions she usually did, but the colors were so vivid. The clouds looked like fluffy pillows, and the castles seemed great and infinite. Holy shit! Are these yours? They are, Space Girl said softly. She stood up and took the plate of cookies from me, then moved it to her desk. It's soothing, she said after a while. Painting, I mean. I picked the drawings I like the most and I finished them. She spoke slowly, like she was carefully choosing her words. I almost felt like there was something that she was trying to avoid. I spotted a painting on the floor that looked like her father. The style was the same, but the content was different. He was surrounded by awkward scribbles and he looked completely and utterly terrified. Space Girl looked down at it, but she seemed to disapprove of it. She turned it around so that I wouldn't have to look at it. We should get started, she said. Sorry. No, it's all right, I said. I sat in the chair for her. I'd like to hear about it. Space Girl watched me from the corner of her eye for a moment, as if she doubted I was being serious. But eventually she sat down behind the easel and started to draw. Soon after that, she was talking too. I stayed long after she had gotten what she needed for her sketch just to talk. She told me that she had always liked fantasy and how she liked unicorns because they were simple but pretty. I hung on to every word and I could have sworn I saw her smiling shyly as she talked. The portrait she'd done of me was something else entirely. Her work had always been beautiful, but this made me look transcendent. I wasn't entirely sure that I was looking at myself at first. There was something about the look on my face. There was a small, almost content smile there. The warmth it conveyed was almost Disney-esque. I love it, I told her. That's incredible Megan, that's really great. You can call me Space Girl if you want, she said. I don't mind the nickname. Not as much as I mind the people, at least. My awe quickly turned to shame, but Space Girl didn't look upset. She just stared at me blankly like she did so often. No. Not blankly. Her face might not have conveyed much emotion, but there was definitely some emotion in there. I wish I would have been nicer to you when we were younger, I said. Is that why you're here now? Space Girl asked. No, I'm here for the assignment. I mean, the art assignment, the portraits. She continued to stare. Did you pick me because you felt bad for me? She asked. No, I just thought it would be cool to work with you. Space Girl didn't react for a moment, but she just nodded. Okay. Her flat tone made it hard to know what she meant by that. She stood up and walked over to the portrait. Mom can drive you home if you need a ride, she said. I opened my mouth to say something else. I wanted to apologize, but I didn't know what. Had I offended her? Had I said something wrong? All right, thanks, was the only thing I could think of. See you tomorrow. And with that, I left her. I was almost afraid to see Space Girl the next morning. I drifted through my classes that day until I reached art, and when I did, I wasn't expecting what I saw. She had clearly been up late, but what she brought in stole my breath away. It was my portrait, but she'd done more with it than I thought possible. She had painted over the sketch, turning me into something beautiful. Flowers bloomed from around my brown hair, and a crown of daisies, lilies, and chrysanthemums adorned my head. The colors were so vivid, and I looked so at peace in it. Space Girl was looking right at me as I came in, as if she was gauging my reaction. But all I could do was stare wide-eyed and in awe. When I looked back at Space Girl, she was smiling at me. Her project single-handedly netted us an A on the project and got the privilege of being hung off outside of the art classroom. Of course, I told her how much I loved it, and I remember the way she smiled when I did. I remember thinking that it was the cutest smile I'd ever seen. My portrait was up for barely even a day before Sasha had to make a comment. I had been on my lunch and had forgotten some fries from the cafeteria when she and Tanya ambushed me. "Where's your flower crown, Dick?" Sasha said. "Leave me alone," I said, brushing past him, but Sasha was out for blood. "I always knew you were a little dick, but now you've posted solid proof of it. We've gone and cracked the case, haven't we? So what happened? Did you go to her house and lick her retarded little snatch? You must have been a real good dick because she went and drew that for you." I tried to walk away from her, but Sasha and Tanya just kept following me. "What's wrong? Am I not pretty enough for you, Dick?" she snapped at me. "Maybe she only fucks retard girls," Tanya said. "I'll bet Space Girl squealed like a pig when she came." I stopped dead in my tracks, and I heard Sasha stop behind me. I don't know what it was about what she had said that pissed me off so much, but those two finally struck a nerve. I spun around, swinging my lunch tray as hard as I could. Fries were scattered everywhere, but although I was aiming for Tanya, I hit Sasha. She went down hard, and I'm not sure if she was even still conscious when she still hit the ground. Tanya was on me in an instant. She slammed me back against the wall and kept me pinned. She had size and strength on me, and there wasn't a thing I could do to stop her. Several other students grabbed at us. A teacher finally got involved, and all three of us got escorted to see the principal. As we left the cafeteria, I saw Space Girl in one of the halls just staring at me. And naturally, I got a 3-day suspension, but Tanya and Sasha were fine. Both of them said they had just been walking and I attacked unprovoked. It was their word against mine. Sasha had a familiar shit-eating grin on her face when she left the office, with only a bruise on her forehead to show for her troubles. But there was a familiar look in her eyes. That same anger I'd seen the last time I laid a hand on her. And something about it scared me. When I came back to school, I realized that I had every reason to be afraid. My portrait was missing. I wondered if they had taken it down because I attacked Sasha, but the truth was a lot worse. "Someone took it," Space Girl said. She was sitting in her usual spot in the library when I found her sketching flowers in her notebook. "When?" "The day after you hit Sasha. I don't think anyone's found it yet." She didn't look up at me, just stayed focused on her art. She didn't need to say it for me to know who she blamed. Who else would it be? I had half a mind to confront Sasha about it, but I didn't know if that would be a good idea or not. Sasha could easily just cry woof. I wouldn't put it past her. In the end, it didn't matter. By the time I was headed to art class, the painting was back, but there had been some modifications made to it. The words, "Retard fucking dyke." These hurtful words had been painted across my portrait in bright red. I saw it from down the hall, and I could see some other students whispering amongst themselves beneath it. I didn't know what to say or do, but this felt like too much. The picture was taken down quickly, but the damage was done. Sasha had gotten her revenge, and she didn't stop with just the painting. Space Girl looked different when I'd seen her in the library. She seemed uneasy, and her eyes were red like she had been crying. "I'm sorry about the painting," I said softly. She looked at me before sighing. "I knew she would do something like that," she said.
I'm so used to it by now that it doesn't bother me anymore. I'm sorry she wrote those things about you, though.
But you worked hard on that, I said.
I'd be upset too.
She just shook her head.
That's not it,
she said. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a crumpled up piece of paper and then slid it over to me. Slowly, I uncrumpled the paper and my eyes widened as I recognized what was on it. It wasn't the same drawing, but it was close enough. It was a depiction of Space Girl hanging herself and me beside her. The caption read, "Weird Dyke Wedding."
There were so many in my locker,
Space Girl said. This is what she drew in your notebook. When I returned it to you, this is what I had to take out. Space Girl looked down at the picture again, before averting her eyes. She didn't pay much attention during class. Instead of taking notes, she sketched in her notebook. I looked over a few times to see her drawing another unicorn. This one seemed so similar to the one I'd seen before. She must not have been quite happy with it though. When I looked back at her notebook, the unicorn wasn't there anymore. She must have just erased it. But it seemed so clean. Like it hadn't been erased at all. Tanya was following me on my walk home that evening. I didn't know what she had in mind, but I didn't want to put up with it. When I was in the middle of a small walking path that cut behind some of the houses on my street, I stopped and looked at Tanya as she kept approaching. "What do you want?" I asked.
"It's a surprise," she said. "Sasha and I want you to know just how much we love the dicks in this town." Oops, I've said too much.
I wanted to hit her. Dear God, I just wanted to hit her. But we both knew she could overpower me. Whatever Tanya had in mind, it wasn't anything good. She drew closer to me, unafraid of anything I'd do.
"Come on, Doc. Go home," she said. "Let's go check out your surprise."
In a sudden horrible moment, I realized that Tanya was threatening me. I also realized that I couldn't outrun her. I couldn't fight her off. I really didn't have much of a choice but do as she asked. Slowly, I turned and walked towards my house with Tanya at my heels. It wasn't far, and up ahead I could see Sasha sitting on a park bench. From a distance, I recognized the red gas can beside her, and I stopped dead in my tracks. Tanya seized me by the arm and pulled me towards the bench. Sasha just watched with a wide, manic grin.
"Hey, Jane," she said. "How's it going?"
"What the fuck is this?"
"I just wanted to chat," Sasha said with a cold chuckle. "You think you can get away with pulling the shit you did the other day? No. You've been treating me like garbage for years, and for what? Because of Space Girl? You know who you're fucking choosing, right? Right? God, I hate that girl, but you know what? I hate you even more. Acting like you're better than me just because you feel bad for her?"
"You were crazy."
Sasha just laughed. "I'm not the one who clocked someone with a fucking tray just for a little bit of teasing. You were absolutely fucking psycho." On the bench behind her, I saw the portrait that Space Girl had painted of me. Sasha picked it up and tossed it in front of me, then picked up the gas can and dumped it onto the canvas. "You want to be a dyke? I don't care. But I'm not letting you and your retired whore put your shit up. So, say goodbye to your little project, slut." Sasha reached into her pocket and took out a book of matches. Her grin widened before suddenly vanishing outright as she looked at something behind us. "What the hell?" Tanya said, and I craned my neck to try and see what they were seeing. As for believing it, that was another story entirely. Standing on the path behind us was a unicorn. But the way it looked was all wrong. This was nothing like a regular horse. Its body was just plain white and almost textureless save for the many thin blue lines that ran along its body. It looked like it had been cut out of a sheet of lined paper, but that was impossible. It had to be impossible. Neatly done gray lines defined the shape of the horse. In fact, the lines reminded me of the ones Space Girl used. This unicorn looked like it had walked out of one of her notebooks. Tanya let me go and stumbled back a few steps, wide eyes as she stared at the advancing unicorn. It let out an angry noise before charging straight for Tanya. She panicked and tried to run. In her desperation to escape, she bolted down the path. But she couldn't outrun the paper unicorn. It lowered its head as it drew nearer to her, and in one swift movement, the horn pierced Tanya's back, impelling her straight through the chest. She screamed as she was hoisted off the ground, and the unicorn circled back to fix Sasha in a murderous glare. Tanya looked down at the massive spikes sticking out of her, her eyes clearly wide with horror and her body twitching as its last spasms of life quickly drained from her. The unicorn lowered its head to let her slide off of his horn, and she hit the ground in a bundle of limbs. Sasha and I stared in silent horror as the unicorn reared up on its hind legs and brought its hoofs down upon Tanya's body. She didn't scream. She didn't bite. She simply lay there as she was trampled again and again. I can only hope she died quickly. Sasha dropped the unlit match and took a slow, terrified step back before toppling over. I stumbled back and looked down to see the portrait of me at her feet, but it had changed. That beautifully painted version of me was now leaning out of the canvas, invading the real world and clutching Sasha's leg tightly. Still with that look of contentment on her face. I watched as the painted me slowly slipped back into her painting as she took Sasha's leg with her. Fuck. Sasha desperately swatted at the painted me, but she couldn't overpower it. She couldn't escape. Her nails tried to dig into the pavement as she was slowly dragged into the canvas. She looked at me in horror, silently begging for help, but all I could do was stare back at her in silence. Jane, help, please. The hands of painted me reached up, seizing Sasha by the hair and forcing her down into the canvas. It was like watching something pull her underwater. 1 minute she was there, and the next she was gone. I stood silent in the park, staring at the painting, then at the paper unicorn. The unicorn huffed before retreating off into the woods, and then I was alone. Slowly, I approached the painting and I looked down at it. It had changed, and now it depicted Sasha, her mouth open in a horrified final scream. After some hesitation, I picked up the painting. I could return it to Space Girl in the morning. They chalked Tanya's death up to an animal attack, and nobody ever found Sasha. I never asked Space Girl about what I saw. I don't think even she knew the answer, although she certainly knew much more than I did. High school was 10 years ago, though, and I've chosen not to remember as much as I can. I've got my own life to live now, and I try not to ask so many questions. Sometimes I see paintings move, but I don't bother with a second glance, and I never ask my wife about them. She doesn't like me to talk about it, and I won't ever force her. The painting of Sasha hangs in her studio at home, right beside the painting of her father. Sometimes I look at it and wonder if maybe things could have been different, but I don't feel too guilty about it. I wouldn't feel too guilty if I heard another story about a suspicious trampling or animal attack either, but to my knowledge, there's been nothing of the sort. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised. I do my best to make sure nobody hurts my beautiful space girl. Thank you for checking out my video. If you like this and you want more videos like it, please let me know. Subscribe if you want to, don't if you don't. See you soon.